En ces heures dramatiques, nous recevons énormément de questions par notre site, par notre Facebook, et ça tourne toujours autour de deux questions en fait. Comment est-ce possible que des choses pareilles se produisent et comment les arrêter, comment empêcher que ça recommence? Un étudiant français d'origine marocaine, Amin, m'écrit « Pas d'excuses ou justification à la barbarie, mais prenons conscience que les monstres ne naissent pas, ils se fabriquent. Sur nos territoires, en France, en Belgique, ils se fabriquent dans le rejet, l'exclusion, l'humiliation, l'exploitation et l'abandon face au discours des extrémistes et fanatiques de tous bords. Ailleurs, dit-il, ils se fabriquent dans le carnage, la destruction, le désespoir et sous les bombes de sanguinaires de tous bords. » Et il conclut « L'humanité est une et est indivisible. Il n'y a aucune différence entre les pleurs d'une mère ayant perdu un fils dans le bombardement de l'hôpital de Kunduz par les forces de l'OTAN et ceux d'un père ayant perdu sa fille à un concert au cœur de Paris. Comme je l'ai dit, notre émotion à tous, notre sympathie pour les familles des victimes de partout, exige de vrais débats. Et je tiens à dire clairement, au-delà des faits, il nous faut les causes, et je tiens à dire, j'accuse M. Fabius, Hollande, Valls, d'être responsables de ce qui est arrivé à Paris, pour la raison bien simple que Fabius a déclaré « Al-Nosra », c'est-à-dire Al-Qaïda en Syrie, fait du bon boulot, reconnaissant l'alliance de fait de la France avec les terroristes en Syrie, et avant on avait eu le cas en Libye et dans d'autres pays. J'accuse les relations avec les régimes de l'Arabie Saoudite et du Qatar qui ont répandu cet endoctrinement, cette intoxication de quelque chose qui se prétend islamiste mais qui n'a rien à voir avec l'islam, qui est une falsification de l'islam. Et je ne suis pas le seul à accuser, puisque M. Alain Chouet, qui était responsable de la DGSC, donc la Direction Générale de la Sécurité Extérieure, M. Alain Chouet a déclaré, je cite, « Au Moyen-Orient, au Sahel, en Somalie, au Nigeria, nous, la France, sommes alliés avec ceux qui sponsorisent depuis 30 ans le phénomène terroriste, alliés avec ceux qui sponsorisent le terrorisme. » Et il continue, « On s'épuise à s'attaquer aux exécutants, c'est-à-dire aux effets du wahhabisme, mais pas à ses causes, et on n'y arrivera pas à arrêter les attentats comme ça, dit-il, à moins de mettre un flic derrière chaque citoyen. » J'accuse l'alliance avec l'Arabie Saoudite et le Qatar. J'accuse l'alliance avec la Turquie, qui a laissé passer des milliers, des dizaines de milliers d'euro-djihadistes sur son sol pour aller commettre en Syrie les mêmes atrocités qu'on voit maintenant à Paris. J'accuse la Turquie d'aider à écouler les stocks de pétrole de Daesh et à financer ce mouvement terroriste. Et je ne suis pas le seul. Madame Ibaskova, qui est ambassadrice de l'Union européenne en Irak, a déclaré à la Commission des Affaires étrangères du Parlement européen, je cite, « Malheureusement, des États membres de l'Union européenne achètent ce pétrole, je ne peux pas donner plus de détails. » J'accuse cette alliance avec la Turquie de faire le jeu du terrorisme. Et d'une façon générale, j'accuse les États-Unis d'avoir utilisé le terrorisme partout où cela les servait, partout où ils n'osaient pas engager eux-mêmes leurs troupes au sol. Ça a commencé avec l'opération Ben Laden en Afghanistan, ça s'est continué en Yougoslavie, Bosnie-Kosovo, dans le Caucase, et puis l'Irak, et puis la Libye, et puis la Syrie, et il y a encore une série d'autres pays. Les États-Unis, à certains moments, combattent le terrorisme, et à d'autres l'utilisent quand ça les arrange. Et bien entendu, on va me dire, oui, mais comment expliquez-vous que s'ils ont financé le terrorisme, maintenant, ces terroristes viennent frapper au cœur même de la France sur le sol européen? Il ne faut pas voir ça comme un complot où la CIA organise tout de A à Z et contrôle tout infailliblement. Oui, ils l'ont organisé, mais ce n'est pas un complot. C'est une alliance avec des forces qui existent et qui ont leur propre agenda. Et de même que Ben Laden a travaillé pour les États-Unis et puis s'est retourné contre les États-Unis, maintenant on a Al-Qaïda en Syrie et Daesh et tous ces mouvements terroristes qui ont travaillé pour les États-Unis, mais ils ont leur agenda à eux et maintenant ils se retournent parce que l'alliance ne tient plus. J'accuse d'une façon générale les États-Unis d'avoir montré l'exemple de la violence, d'avoir mené des guerres tout le temps depuis 25 ou 30 ans et d'avoir montré à tous les peuples que les problèmes, on veut les résoudre par la violence. Je rappelle que la charte de l'ONU prévoit que tous les conflits doivent être négociés. On n'a pas le droit de faire la guerre. C'est strictement interdit par la charte de l'ONU depuis 1945. Et je rappelle qu'un général des États-Unis, Wesley Clark, avait révélé que pour l'administration des États-Unis, en 2001, ils avaient décidé de prendre, je cite, 7 pays, l'Afghanistan, l'Irak, l'Iran, la Somalie, le Soudan, la Libye et le Liban. Ils avaient déjà annoncé ça en 2001. Donc il y avait clairement un programme pour développer la guerre. J'accuse cette alliance avec Israël de empoisonner, de semer un climat de haine dans le Moyen-Orient et de montrer qu'on maintient le colonialisme par la violence et en fait le refus de négocier.
Hello, welcome back to Press TV's live coverage of the terrorist attacks that have happened in Paris. Well, joining us for the analytical part of this live coverage, we have Ken Okeefe, former U.S. Marine, who joins us in the studios here in the capital, Tehran, and Rodney Martin, who's a former U.S. congressional staffer, who joins us from L.A., Los Angeles. Thank you, gentlemen. Ken Okeefe, I'll start with you. This should, I would think, be a warning signal to some of the countries supporting the terrorists in the war in Syria, in particular the U.S., Turkey, and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, well, I hope actually that it's even more of a wake-up call for us to realize that we are ISIS, that the Western governments that are in bed with Saudi Arabia, who is the primary funder of ISIS, along with Qatar and other Gulf states, we not only provide the political cover and military assistance to Saudi Arabia while it slaughters innocent people in Yemen, but we also provide the cover for them to go ahead and do their dirty dealing with these psychopaths who are running around Syria and other parts of the world as well, Iraq. Let us remember that before the United States invaded Iraq, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Look at it today. Let us also remember that when Gaddafi was in power in Libya, there was very little Al-Qaeda. And in fact, now we look at it, and it's an absolute basket case full of these operatives. And we look to Syria as well as yet another example of where these problems were actually quite under control in terms of Al-Qaeda. In fact, Bashar al-Assad was assisting the United States, this is all on record, in a very meaningful way. In fact, many of the tortures that were being carried out were being done by Bashar al-Assad, or at least his regime, in order to extract information from people that we were supposedly fighting. I believe that it is beyond any doubt for any sensible person to realize that not only is the United States providing the financial cover, military cover, political cover for these terrorists through our proxies, but we've also, in pure technical sense, provided the training for these people in Jordan, and Turkey, another one of our best friends, has been shuttling these psychopaths across the country from Turkey into Syria for a long time now. So, the idea that the West is actually fighting a war against ISIS is beyond ridiculous. So what we really need to do is start realizing the fact that we are ISIS, and the reason why our corrupt, treasonous governments are carrying out these policies is because they do not represent us. They represent the bankers, and the bankers make a hell of a lot of money off of war, and more importantly, as long as we're all fighting each other, as long as we're all not trusting each other, as long as we're all simply being played as pawns over and over, then they can maintain this tyrannical system of never-ending war. So this is really the wake-up call. What has happened in Paris is us. We are responsible through our corrupt governments for all of these policies, and even if these individuals who carried this out are not directly working for Mossad, CIA, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the same thing, even if they did this organically of their own volition, believe me, that is exactly what our so-called governments want. That is what the policy that we've been fostering over and over. And quite frankly, if we're to look at ISIS, ISIS stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. They never attack Israel, and that in itself also tells you a lot about who these individuals are.
Well, some of the events there, Ken Okeefe, that our guest Rodney Martin talks about in terms of Islamophobia being created again, or more policies to exercise against Muslims, well, maybe this is what the intent is behind these attacks, if there are any hands at play behind the scenes of some of the countries involved in this so-called war on terror.
Well, indeed, that's the case, and it's just more of the same now, isn't it? Now, I'm a non-Muslim, and I am angry at the way Muslims have been portrayed around the world. I have lived in Muslim lands, and I have experienced some of the greatest hospitality and generosity that you will ever experience, and yet Muslims in general are being associated with this monstrosity, this most recent monstrosity known as ISIS, which again I say is Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, and also Al-Qaeda previous to that, Al-Nusra Front. All of these things are intended to smear Islam as a whole, 1.8 billion people on this planet, to associate them with this sort of madness, when in fact it is us in the West that are creating this stuff, funding it, very much protecting it. In fact, America has been providing air cover to these psychopaths in Syria and Iraq largely. And we see that when Russia comes in and actually does something constructive, look how long many of these men are shaving their beards and running off with their heads, tails between their legs. It is really, really, really disgusting that people have been conned into thinking that Muslims have anything to do with this. And let us harken back to the original incident which has caused this madness known as the War on Terror. The so-called 19 hijackers in Osama bin Laden is one of the greatest fairy stories ever created. The idea that this man in a cave in Afghanistan on dialysis was masterminding this incredible operation in the United States with 19 so-called hijackers wielding box cutters, Mohammed Atta among them, snorting cocaine and hanging out with strippers in Florida, that these people are responsible for this event in defiance of the greatest military machine in the history of mankind, never mind all of the evidence that's come forward that makes the official version of 9/11 beyond ridiculous. Muslims did not carry out 9/11. In fact, those who blame the Muslims, primarily the Jewish supremacist Zionist-controlled media of America and the government which is controlled by these Jewish supremacist Zionists in America, all of them parrot the same ridiculous, tired old line that Muslims are responsible. And this is an agenda which is intended to create a clash of civilizations. And if we are smart as people, we're going to see the agenda for what it is, and we're going to realize that those who are collaborating in this agenda need to be held to account for literal war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I'm including in that not just the politicians in the military, but those in the media who have perpetuated these lies, because there is no way that they could possibly believe this nonsense. These people have literally sold their soul to the service of the devil.
This piece of breaking news that's at the bottom of the screen, Ken Okeefe, that states, it's a message from Assad to Hollande. France suffered on Friday the brutality of terrorism that Syria that has plagued Syria for more than 5 years. That's quite telling in terms of what Syria has experienced. Your reaction to that statement?
Yes, it is truly incredible that we listen to anyone, whether it's Francois Hollande or Obama or any of these other puppets, as if anything they says has any merit whatsoever. There is no moral authority at all in the West. When these people get up, they are an embarrassment to all of us who have a functioning brain and a heart. These people are traitors, whether they come from France or whether they come from Britain or America, and everything they say is to be taken as complete and total rubbish. The idea that France and the West is not directly responsible for the mayhem that has been occurring in Syria is again beyond ridiculous. We know for a fact how we've been supposedly funding and supporting the moderate rebels. There is no such thing. Even recently, a U.S. general admitting that there may be 4 or 5 of these people in Syria. The entire policy is intended to create havoc in the Middle East, and it is extremely important that people around the world begin to fully comprehend that these policies that are being carried out in the Middle East are actually not failures. I'm getting sick of hearing so-called experts talking about geopolitics and how America is failing to learn from its mistakes and all of this nonsense. These are not mistakes. These are intentional policies to wreak havoc, to sow the seeds of sectarian hatred. Again, let me cite the fact that before we took Saddam Hussein out in Iraq, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Also, when we played this game in Libya, there was no such thing as ISIS and all of this madness that's going on in Libya today. Syria, again, while it had its problems, and it certainly had its human rights abuses, most definitely did not have the problem that it has today. Every country that we touch by Western policy, every country that we touch in the Middle East is full of these monsters. Let's look to Iran, the country that we claim to be the biggest threat to everyone, the Israeli Jewish supremacist agenda, which constantly tells us that Iran is the big threat to the world and that it wants to wipe Israel off the map. Let's look at Iran. Let's look how many attacks by Al-Qaeda and ISIS are occurring here. Let's look at how Iran has been fighting MEK, a true terrorist force that has killed over 20,000 people in the last 20 years or so. This nation is fighting terrorism legitimately. It has provided sanctuary to Jews and Christians historically over the millennia. It has not indulged in any war for hundreds of years other than the imposed war in which we forced with our attack dog Saddam Hussein, and yet we are being told that Iran is the threat. Here I sit in Tehran, and I can tell you the threat from ISIS is next to none. And the reason why is because Iran is not a player in this nasty game in which Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other Gulf states, Turkey, Jordan, ourselves, Britain, France, all fund, train, support, and ultimately are responsible for these monsters running around in their latest branded name, ISIS, which I will repeat a third time stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service.
We're going to end it there. Thank you so much for that. That's Ken Okeefe, former U.S. Marine, here in the studios with a statement.